This, I think, this great leap forward towards socialism by nationalizing almost one-fifth of the United States economy through Obamacare, I think it is the most disgusting development that United States experienced in its history. Then in the Soviet Union, definitely the healthcare was provided mostly to the people in power. If you are a high-ranking member of the Communist Party or government, then you have an access to good healthcare. For gray masses, they treated them as slaves. The slaves and if slaves were in productive age, for example, if they're below 60 years of age, then they would have more health care available for them than if you are after that time. Then, for example, old age survivors in Soviet Union were not provided even with elementary health care. They would not be provided with any surgical care. Their hemodialysis would be stopped for people after 65. So that Soviet medicine is really has a lot to teach us, because it was, I would say, the most vivid example of inhumanity, of the evil of socialism.
Shifting gears for a moment, let's talk about Soviet monetary policy. How did the ruble operate in what was effectively a closed economic system?
Yes, well, the ruble was not a currency, actually. It was also some kind of a rationing coupon. Um, I worked for a while as a chief consultant of Soviet Bank for Foreign Trade. Well, worked was a kind of overstatement of my activities. Nobody worked in that bank. But we had a joke at that time. The joke was, what is the true exchange rate between the dollar, the British pound, and the ruble? And the answer was that $1 cost 1 pound of dried rubles. And that was exactly like that, because the ruble was not based on the market economy. So the commissars would print as many rubles as they can. To some extent, it was a kind of Federal Reserve uh, of the United States, which went completely amok. They would print the amount of ruble according to the plan they make. For example, if they want to build another huge railroad from nowhere to nowhere, then they would need to pay, say, 16 billion rubles in wages to workers who would work on this, and another, say, $15 billion to people who would work for these workers. And so then they would order the Minister of Finance to print 31 billion rubles, new rubles, and then they will see if they don't have enough rubles, they will print more. They will print more, and that's why ruble didn't have much value, and that's why socialism actually didn't work. My first job was at the Soviet Department of Labor, and our Minister of Labor, another socialist bureaucrat, he thought that we should just introduce new systems of payment, like payment by results, so then or would kind of introduce the piece rate everywhere instead of time rate. And they've tried to. And it turned out that nobody wanted these rubles anymore. Because if you don't have anything to buy with these rubles, then the ruble would be just a ticket, as they would say. There's a ticket for a fight. Ticket for a fight for something real. So that's I would say that this type of monetary policy is a very good example for us not to follow and to return back to sound money.
Any memories, Yuri, of your consumer experiences as a young boy in Russia? For instance, what was the grocery store experience like?
I remember my first grocery store experience was when I was 7 years old. I was spending a lot of time after school standing in long bread lines in Kazan, because my grandmother, who was working, she would put me in this line, and I would be just standing in this line hours and hours and hours. And then after work, she would come and replace me in this line, and we will get some bread to buy. So that was in 1960s. That was the bleak time of Nikita Khrushchev. And then when we moved to Moscow, Moscow was a little bit better from point of view of supplies. So there were no bread lines. It's like in every concentration camp, the best place to be is near the kitchen, and Moscow was one. Was kind of a showcase for the Westerners. But even in Moscow, everything was rationed. If you don't have rationing coupons, you don't have access to meat or to things like that. And I remember when Soviet Union was already coming to its end, then and it came to its end because Mr. Gorbachev he had a policy of returning to human face of socialism. He didn't understand at all that socialism can exist only based on mass murder, only based on coercion and crude violence. And he decided to to make socialism with human face. And because he made this point, then people thought that nobody would be shot anymore, and people stopped working. And at that time, this shortage became pervasive even in Moscow. Even in Moscow, people were hunting for food. Even in Moscow, you could buy whatever you want only at the black market. So I have a lot of friends, had a lot of friends in that time in the Soviet Union in medical profession. Can you imagine they would be medical people, doctors, and they wouldn't have a telephone at home. The telephones were 9 telephones per 100 households. To get a telephone, you'd need to go and bribe all these little officials from the government phone company or party people. The same with cars, for example. There was 1.2 cars per 100 households. And that would not be just private cars. 1.2 would be all cars in the Soviet Union, including cars which belong to the military, to the party, to the KGB. They will all be divided by the number of households, and then you'll get 1.2. So this was miserable in a country with 11 time zones, the country which could be the richest country in the world, which had almost everything possible and impossible natural resources.
Well, it's interesting you bring up the automobiles. Do you have memories of the Trabant or the Soviet limo? If I recall, was the ZIL or something along those lines?
Yes. The party people, they were driving these limos, and usually were the escorts of these limos, while the cars in the Soviet Union were kind of like make it yourself kit for the people. So the people could buy a car, and I think it was a famous joke, but it has all the truth in it. That in the 1980s, to buy a car, you would need to pay in advance. You go to the government car distributorship. You pay the full price in advance. There was absolutely no loans, no credit in the Soviet Union, and so you would pay in advance, and then they would tell you that when your car will be delivered to you. And the joke was that one gentleman is coming to this car distributorship, paying in advance, and the car dealer is telling him, he said, "Well, comrade, your car will be delivered on the 9th of September of 2021. And the gentleman is looking at his appointment book. He said, "Morning or afternoon, sir?" And he said, "What's the difference, son?" He said, "Well, in the morning a plumber will come to fix my toilet." And that's exactly how the Soviet economy worked. So it's very sad that many people don't realize that socialism is not working. It will never work because it does not have any incentives for people to do anything. Because of that, to make people do what they want, the socialist leaders would resort to murder, would resort to coercion. That's why anywhere from 43 to 60 million people were murdered in the Soviet Union alone. 78 million people were murdered in communist China. So if you will look at any socialist state, you would see huge mass graves as monuments to socialist experiments of the 20th century. And the bad thing about this is, as Soviets would say, that the only lesson of history is that it does not teach us anything. And we have people like Mr. Obama and people around him, as well as many others, who think that we can have a free ride to to socialism, to have some kind of a socialism with human face, to have everybody living the same way, and everybody supporting the government. And that's what I'm very sad to see. I came to the United States 26 years ago already, and it's very sad for me to see how this country is losing its freedoms, losing its choices, and embracing socialism. So that's very, very sad.
Ladies and gentlemen, we thank Dr. Yuri Maltsev for his time this weekend. Sobering and a cautionary tale for all Americans. Yuri, thanks very much. Good to talk to you.
Oh, thank you, Jeff. Very good to talk to you.